It's now time to introduce the moderator for our first keynote speaker. Jacob Glick is the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer for Rogers. Jacob is responsible for leading Rogers' integrated corporate affairs team, including regulatory affairs, public policy, government relations, internal and external communications, and social media. Jacob joined Rogers from Google, where he held a number of leadership positions, including head of the Global Central Public Policy and Government Relations team. During his time at Google, Jacob established and led Google Canada's Public Policy and Government Relations team. Welcome, Jacob Glick.
Thank you very much. And thank you to both of our co-chairs for their opening remarks. I have the privilege today of introducing this morning's keynote speaker, the Honorable Scott Brison. With 7 general elections to his credit, Minister Brison has served as Member of Parliament for the beautiful Nova Scotia riding of Kings Hants since 1997. He served as Minister of Public Works and Government Services and Receiver General of Canada from 2004 to 2006, then the youngest member of Prime Minister Paul Martin's cabinet. With a keen interest in Canada-US relations and international trade, Scott has been a key Liberal spokesperson on economic files over the past decade. Today, he serves as Prime Minister Trudeau's cabinet as President of the Treasury Board, leading the management agenda of the government. A government that was elected on a commitment to openness and transparency in government. One of Minister Brison's key assignments is to expand open data initiatives, making government data digitally available to all Canadians. In its early days, the Trudeau government has demonstrated a broad conception of what open government means, not just opening government data sets, but also using digital tools to promote a more engaged citizenry. The federal government has taken a leading role in coordinating open government nationally, and we're glad to see the new administration grabbing that baton with gusto. So please help me in welcoming Minister Brison. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. Thanks very much, Jacob. I'm delighted to be here with you this morning. Jacob mentioned that I was the youngest member of Paul Martin's cabinet. For about 10 years, that's what everybody said about me. They said he was the youngest member of Paul Martin's cabinet. Now that ended when Prime Minister Trudeau announced his new cabinet. They would say, the media would report that we had fresh faces like Chrystia Freeland and Bill Murnau and Jody Wilson-Raybould. And then you had the old war horses like Ralph Goodale, John McCallum, and Scott Brison. Politics, particularly 10 years in opposition, really ages you in this country. Delighted to be here with you today, and I want to thank Canada 2020 and Publivit for having organized this and led the charge on it. I believe Wayne Waters is here as a co-chair. Deb Matthews, my provincial colleague who's leading the charge in Ontario. I worked with Wayne when he was Secretary of the Treasury Board, when I was part of Paul Martin's cabinet and on the Treasury Board Cabinet Committee some time ago. I also want to thank Don Lenihan for his leadership. And Don initially contacted me about this conference. And Don has been providing great leadership on the issue of open government. I mean, Don was into open government even before open government became cool. To the extent that it has. I also want to recognize there's a lot of wealth of knowledge in this room, and can't recognize everyone, but also David Eves, who's done so much in Canada and internationally to advance open data and open government. J'aimerais remercier tout le monde qui a contribué à l'organisation de cet événement. Aujourd'hui, je vais vous parler des prochains pas que nous prendrons en tant que gouvernement pour être plus ouvert transparent et accessible. Prime Minister Trudeau has been clear. He believes, and we believe, that government information should be open by default. And this is going to take a big shift of culture. We're talking about reversing the onus. Instead of the onus being on citizens to make the case on why they deserve the information, the onus will increasingly be on government to explain why it won't provide them with that information. And the principle that has guided us for some time in democratic governance, that government belongs to the people, in today's information age will be government information belongs to the people. Our commitment to open government rests on three key pillars: open data, open information, and open dialogue. In terms of open data, of course we're talking about the raw government information that is publicly available for citizens, businesses, charities, any stakeholder from which they can make better decisions. We've had significant success on this, but we've got a long ways to go. Open data has a direct effect on the choices made by Canadians. For everyday Canadian family, for instance, when they purchase a car, one of the most important or most popular data sets available in the Government of Canada Open Data Portal is information about car fuel economy. That's a very practical example of how open data affects the lives of Canadians. Canadians will make better choices, better decisions, when they have access to better data. In terms of open information, Canadians expect and deserve to know how and why decisions are made by their governments. Open information aims to meet this expectation by being more transparent about the information that guides our decision-making processes. The current access to information regime is part of what we do to make some of this information accessible, but it in no way should be the only way we make information available to Canadians. For example, the decision by the Prime Minister for our government to be the first to publish ministers' mandate letters publicly gives you a clear indication of the commitment we have to open government. Our mandates are posted online, clearly lay out the Prime Minister's priorities for each minister. Now, in terms of open dialogue, and this is the part that I find so exciting and compelling, and I enjoyed Don Lenahan's piece today about this and the importance and the transformative capacity of open dialogue to create better government for Canadians. It's important to realize that governments need to trust citizens and need to engage citizens as we're identifying problems and as we develop solutions. This is a real shift in terms of public policy making. With open dialogue, we have the ability to achieve better public policy and for it to co-emerge with more public support. Open data, open information, and open dialogue form these three pillars for our plan for open government. Ça fait déjà longtemps que notre Premier ministre mène la lutte pour un gouvernement plus ouvert, soit bien avant qu'il soit devenu Premier ministre. Il croit sincèrement qu'un gouvernement plus ouvert et transparent sera aussi un meilleur gouvernement. As an opposition MP, now Prime Minister Trudeau actually tabled a private member's bill, C613, to reform the Access to Information Act. Under his leadership, we've led the way in opposition, in fact, on proactive disclosure. Our caucus was the first to proactively disclose members' expenses online. And last June, as an opposition leader, now Prime Minister Trudeau announced a 32-point plan for a more open, transparent, and better government. And many were skeptical at that time of the breadth and scope of the plan. But one thing you have to understand about our Prime Minister, and I worked with him closely in opposition, I work closely with him now, is that he he's not guided just by doing that which is popular. He's guided by doing what is right. And this plan wasn't designed to win an election. It was built as a plan to inform the actions of a new government. In my mandate letter, the Prime Minister tasked me with the following responsibilities to advance this vision. One, taking a leadership role in improving the use of evidence and data in program innovation and evaluation. Two, accelerating and expanding our open data initiatives and making even more government data available in easy-to-use digital formats so that Canadians can easily access and use it. And three, leading a review of the Access to Information Act. Now, the Access to Information Act hasn't been updated since 1983. I mean, think 1983. I mean, K-cars were hot. I mean, think of it. I used K-cars and hot in the same sentence. I also, in this speech, used Don Lenihan and cool in the same sentence. Anyway, it's just, sorry, I'm here all week, folks. But you know, just last week in our budget, we reinforced this commitment to open and transparent government with specific investments, including doubling existing resources for open government initiatives, including $11.5 million to expand open government and $12.9 million to enhance access to information. And also, secondly, $14 million to improve our service strategy. So we're continuing in that direction, and today I want to share with you some of the next steps. Today, in fact, I'm pleased to announce the launch of public consultations on two important items taken directly from the mandate letter. First, we'll be consulting Canadians on the development of a new strategy on open government. And second, we're looking forward to input on the best way to both improve and strengthen Canada's access to information framework. On a devant nous des enjeux complexes et on n'a certainement pas toutes les réponses. C'est donc crucial que nos actions soient inspirées du savoir, de l'expertise de nos citoyens. Beginning today, Canadians can go to open.canada.ca to tell us their views on what should be in the next strategy on open government. We'll be holding in-person discussions and using technology to consult with Canadians across the country. And again, the details on this process are available on open.canada.ca. The plan resulting from this consultation will be released over the summer. It will cover the full range of open government actions, from open data all the way to open science, and will represent a significant step forward, both in the way the result will be a significant step forward, but the way we're going to achieve the result in terms of open dialogue as we render our government more open. We're also moving forward on our commitment to strengthen and improve the access to information regime. Canadians have been clear that improvements to this program are needed and are overdue, and there's a two-phase process that we're going to undertake to achieve this. First, we're going to move quickly to implement our platform commitments and other significant improvements, which we identify through consultations for a set of early deliverables that we can deliver in the short term. We've already committed to, one, giving the Information Commissioner the power to order government information to be released. Secondly, ensuring that the Act applies appropriately to the Prime Minister's office and Ministers' offices, and that also applies to administrative institutions that support Parliament and the courts. As we engage the broad Canadian public, we'll also partner with Parliament. I'll be appearing before the House of Commons Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics to engage in this process because it's very important that Parliament and all parties be part of this process as we move forward. We'll be also working closely with the Information Commissioner and be engaging with her on this. Once we're informed by our consultations and by the committee's advice, we will move forward to amend the Act. This will only be the first step. We'll also be conducting the first full and now it will be a mandatory every 5-year review of the Act in 2018. Having this as a mandatory 5-year review from the first comprehensive review will be during 2018, and after that, every 5 years after will enable us to assure Canadians that no future, or at no point in the future will the Act ever be as out of date and out of touch as it is today. We're also putting 21st century technology at the service of civic engagement. To help kick off the consultation, I look forward to hosting our first Google Hangout on open government with experts, leaders, and interested Canadians next Wednesday, April 6th at 1 p.m. Ottawa time. Taken together, this new strategy on open government and this two-phase approach of the review, rather, of the Access to Information Act will bring better or greater transparency. It will open the doors for greater public participation and support our commitment to evidence-based decision-making. By opening our ears, we open our doors to a wealth of experience, knowledge, and expertise to help us find solutions to government's challenges, which, after all, are the challenges we face together as a nation. This is very much about trust. If citizens understand why their government is taking a particular course of action, if they have been engaged from the beginning, if they have access to the same information government has, they'll have a lot more confidence and trust in the outcomes. In practice, open dialogue allows for policy and public support to co-emerge. Instead of having a policy shop craft the policy and then having a comms team go out and sell the policy, the process will be turned on its head and is being turned on its head. Open dialogue enables government to engage experts, stakeholders, interesting parties, and the broader public in simultaneously identifying the problems and developing the solutions. Open dialogue produces better policy and more public buy-in. Open government provides us with a huge opportunity to be more relevant with our policymaking. What better example, for instance, of how this is done than if you look at the work of web designers. They're obviously adapted to this century, the digital age. They're a product of it. And good website design is based heavily on user testing. Designers know to test and measure relentlessly, refine continuously, and to really understand how people use their sites. The same principle should apply to the design of government policies, programs, and services. And the real test of success is whether they deliver results for the people who use them. Now, internationally, Canada, as a member of the Open Government Partnership, is now striving to be a world leader in open government. We're showing leadership at home and abroad in advancing the goals of openness, accountability, and transparency. As you know, new technologies are making it possible to provide open data in easily accessible and usable formats. We have a directive on open government that enables departments to get data into the hands of Canadians more quickly and more easily. Beaucoup de progrès ont déjà été accomplis pour fournir les données et l'information aux Canadiens sur des supports leur permettant de les réutiliser de façon novatrice. Il y a plein de pratiques exemplaires ici et partout dans le monde. In the federal government, Health Canada has an app that gives users up-to-date information on advisories on health and safety, product and food product safety. That's one example. In Ontario, the app GridWatch, which uses Government of Ontario data to show you where the province's power comes from, when the grid is running on clean energy and when it's not. Open government data is being reused to help people in their daily lives, and it's encouraging and it's useful, and it's just the beginning. But it's not just about making information available. There's also an issue around the quality of information and data we provide. One of the things that I'm proud of as a government is we moved immediately in terms of bringing back the long-form census, but we are, thank you, Deb. And here I was thinking that this speech had no applause lines. It's great. You can always count on another politician to, but in terms of the long-form census, it is critically important that we collect the best data so that we can provide through open government the best information and data to Canadians. It's also, I've noted economists who have told us that the quality of our labor market data is not what it ought to be. The quality of our housing market data isn't what it ought to be. If we're going to inform young Canadians about their career choices in the future, we ought to be able to provide them with really good labor market data in terms of trends for the future. Canadians, as they're making the most important investments for most Canadian families in housing, ought to be provided with the best possible housing market data. These are things, so we're working on the quality of information, but also, I mean, today the focus is on openness, but also we have to be cognizant of the importance to be rigorous in terms of the quality. I also want to, make the point that we're well aware that this is not the way governments have traditionally operated. And the digital age has created an entirely new infrastructure, and changing the culture of government is going to take time and effort. There is a sense of urgency in our government to hasten progress on this file. Canadians are innovative and they're smart. Young Canadians in particular have high expectations for openness and transparency, and they often master the means necessary to make the most of them. On that point, we want to attract more young Canadians to the public service. And for us to do that, we need to make government more open because it's going to be important to them that they participate in, whether it's in terms of their employer, they want to work for an employer that is guided by principles of openness and transparency. But also, it's a catch-22, we also need them to help shape open government, because in some ways, young Canadians are the people who actually understand this the most. So we see this as really important in terms of attracting millennials to the public service. This agenda in particular is tremendously important in terms of accomplishing this. Just in closing, in today's world, it's clear that we don't have the right to keep from Canadians the information that ultimately belongs to them. The transparency bus has left the station, and we can't waste the opportunity presented to us to be more open and better as governments. I truly believe that open government is better government. That means we're held accountable for our decisions. It sharpens our focus on the needs of Canadians. It drives us to better policy results. Open government is the future, and we need to get it right. And that's why, again, I'm pleased to announce the launch of public consultations on both a new open government strategy and improving access to information. I hope that many of you will go online or attend in person to participate in these consultations. Your ideas and your expertise are needed as we work together to build a more open, accessible, and better government for all Canadians. Thank you very much. Great stuff.
Congratulations. Which you get to choose.
Oh, that's fine. Nice socks.
Thanks. I made them myself.
Really nice. Wow. You know, the Prime Minister has like created this trend now. You know, these fancy socks, and here I am. You know, these boring kind of. You know, I feel so out of date. I mean, I have public servants come into my office from Treasury Board with these fun socks all the time, and you know, I feel very. Now you're doing it.
Well, you know, there's a mall just attached to this building. We can go to like the sock store afterwards.
Really? Well, that would be. If that's what turns you on, sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
It's the joy of socks.
I'm fine with that. Yeah. That's right.
Is this thing on?
That's right.
All right.
I usually get mine at
no,
Costco,
Minister,
but that's sorry.
No one came to see our stand-up routine.
Sure, that's right.
Well, not mine anyway. This is really the opportunity for participants in this event to participate. So there are microphones there. Kevin's walking past one, but I don't think he has a question. So this is now your opportunity to ask the minister a question, to engage in the dialogue about open dialogue. And so I encourage you to get up and to present at the microphone, and we'll have an opportunity to have a conversation. While you are forming your question, I'll take the first shot.
Sure thing.
So, Minister, I thought the discussion was really interesting, both in the opening remarks today and in your speech, about the role of individuals in society and their participation. And the deliberative democracy that you were talking about in the context of open dialogue is really focused on how individuals can better participate in government policy making. What do you see in that context as the role of civil society organizations and group-based organizations?
Well, a couple things, and I want to give you an example in my region. You talk about challenges. Atlantic Canada and Atlantic Canadian provinces face huge public policy challenges, and a public that is not always open to new ideas coming from government. And I'll give an example of how something transpired in terms of the development of a public policy in my region, and it didn't go so well politically, and how it could have gone differently had we used open dialogue as part of the process. The government of Sean Graham in New Brunswick took a very bold public policy decision to reform energy in that province, to tackle a big issue around NB Power. NB Power, I think at that time, had a $5 billion debt, and to move forward with the deal with Hydro-Quebec. Ultimately, the public, this became a huge public issue. The public was against it. Part of the problem was that the government was solving a problem the public didn't know they had. And if you spent time actually engaging the public on that part of it, to talk to them about the issues around not fixing an energy system, as an example, and not doing that, the potential risk, what the impact will be on power rates. You want to get people talking, in terms of, and then so that they really understood the severity of the challenge. Then you could have actually had a discussion with them about potential solutions. So the public could have been better engaged, and I think going forward, federal, provincial governments will recognize the importance of engaging the public, both in terms of identifying problems, but also in terms of identifying solutions. The public's really smart, and if you share with them the information you have about the problems, and part of politics is pedagogy, part of it is politicians educating the public, part of it is the public educating us. And open dialogue enables that to happen both ways. But if you share the same information, a smart public will come to the same conclusions as a smart government in a lot of cases. And there's a lot of groups out there and who represent various interests and perspectives. They're really important to engage as part of this. But what excites me about open dialogue is that Canadians broadly, particularly young Canadians, can engage on issues of importance, both the challenges and opportunities facing provincial and federal governments.
Now, in your remarks, I was really struck by kind of two components of what you were describing. The first is the culture shift that you want to enable within the federal public service. And the second is how creaky the access to information regime is. When you were talking about 1983, I was thinking that, the Macintosh computer only came out in 1984. So people had Apple IIes and PCs at the time.
Yeah, well, I think we had a Commodore 64,
right.
if I recall. And, I mean, it's remarkable how quickly things have advanced in terms of technology and culture around this. I think in terms of information, when I was first elected in 1997, when I wrote a speech, I would contact the Library of Parliament, and I would say, this is the the topic and I need some help and, here are some questions, and I would work very closely with the Library of Parliament. Today, writing the same speech, I'll be in my place in Chevery, Hants County, Nova Scotia, and I'll be, Googling the information. And what's interesting about that is, in terms of the democratization of information, is that as a legislator and as now as a minister, the speech I'm writing, the policy I'm developing, I'm using the same information that a grade 8 student writing a report would be using, in real time. And I find that democratization of information is what really excites me, that the public who, and I go back, young people who represent the most educated and informed generation in the history of our country, have the capacity to engage in these issues to an extent that they've never had before. What's frustrating to me in some ways is that it's the same generation that has been less engaged, but I'm excited about recent trends in terms of greater interest, and it's, I'll go back to within the public service. We have a world-class public service in Canada, but we also have demographic issues and the baby boom generation moving towards retirement. We need to attract millennials. The average age is 37 for the new hires within the public service. I see this agenda of open government as being something really important to engage that new generation of citizens, but new generations of public servants on.
I think now we've got some questions from the floor. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Joe Thornley. Thanks very much, Minister, for your announcement today. The online engagement gives the quiet people at the back of the room a chance to be heard, and it's a great initiative. I think the credibility of a lot of public engagement is established at the end when people get a chance to see whether the people who've asked have actually cared about what they were told, listened, and considered. Can you tell us a bit about what you intend for the end of this consultation period? What kind of a report back you'll be issuing? And have you considered a staged report where maybe you report back in draft and then give people a chance to further comment on what you're considering at that stage?
Well, thank you, Joe, and it's an important point because I think we would create cynicism if people felt that they weren't heard. It's important also to realize that we want to, for instance, on the ATIP side, it's a two-stage process. We're looking for early wins in terms of the first phase of this. We've got some specific platform commitments that we're ready to go in the near future in terms of legislation, working through Parliament, of course. But the consultation, we think, can also bring forward some other good ideas that we can include in this early win category. The more comprehensive review will take place in 2018 as the first of reviews that will happen every five years. Your point is very well taken, and I'm looking at Ian Stewart and at Treasury Board and others who are here and our team. I want to make sure that we enable people to participate in an iterative process here, such that if there are suggestions that are made, and if we do not include them, for instance, in the first round, I want to understand, and I want stakeholders and citizens to understand why that is the case. And I think part of what we need to do is, when we receive input, if it doesn't necessarily, if for some reason we do not include that in what we ultimately do, let's have a conversation about that, both internally, but broadly, so that people can understand. Because there may be people in this room who want us to do certain things, but when we explain some of the challenges, may say, okay, that makes sense. They may still disagree. I'm one minister working with a number of ministers across government on this. There may be impedimenta to us doing certain things that I haven't thought about as a minister that another minister. I think the key here, and your point, is that open up have truly open dialogue and lay out why you're doing certain things and why you can't do certain things now, and why what the reasons are. And I think people understand that. Thank you.
Minister, we have a question on Twitter, which is from at @AE_Clark. What's the evidence that Canadians want more of a role in policymaking than before? Survey data, anecdote, assumption? I didn't include the punctuation when I read this out loud. Survey data, question mark?
Anecdote, assumption. Well, the question, I mean, what evidence do we have that Canadians want more of a role in policymaking? I've been elected 7 times. I spent a lot of time with the public in my riding and other parts of the country. I have found that there's been a growth of interest of people wanting to actually engage on this. So I guess you could say part of it is my own experience. I feel very strongly about this. The Prime Minister, this is something that this is part of his core set of values in terms of what we have to do, in terms of, and he did this, frankly, even in terms of the Liberal Party, prior to becoming Prime Minister, in terms of engagement. But as Prime Minister, this is central to his thinking. I think it makes sense to realize that when you think that the public have more information today than they've ever had, they also have more education today than they've ever had in the past. It just makes sense that they're going to want to do something with that information and that education. And there are 338 people in the House of Commons. They all bring something to the House in terms of their expertise and understanding of issues. But there's a lot of Canadians out there who have real expertise who want to be part of this. And the degree to which we engage them is going to create better government, better policy results, and a better functioning democracy. So the question is, whether we did polling or something. No, not that I'm aware of. I certainly haven't seen any of it. This is just something that I think makes sense and is central to what our Prime Minister and our government believes in.
Thank you. We've got a question over here.
Thanks. Scott Chamberlain from the Association of Canadian Financial Officers. I also sit on the Public Sector Integrity Commissioners Advisory Board, hence my question. Mr. Brison, do you think open government will have a proactive deterrent effect on wrongdoing, misuse of assets in government? And secondly, you mentioned a 5-year review in the legislation. You may be aware there are 5-year reviews built in some current legislation, the enabling legislation for the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner Office as well. And it's 4 years overdue in terms of its review. So how do you ensure that those reviews are done in a timely fashion?
Thanks for the question. Firstly, I think any transparency for whether it's for companies or government improves ethical standards. This is for contracting policies. I mentioned expense reports and putting everything out there. It just causes people to think differently. And there's a sanitizing effect of actually shining public light on the transactions and processes within governments or corporations. And it really does make a difference. In terms of ongoing, whether you're talking about ATIP or other regimes within government and 5-year reviews, and I think part of the thing is that particularly with technology and the culture shift we're experiencing and will continue to experience, the rapidity of change is such that 5 years will be the minimum, but there's going to be demands on us to evergreen regimes on an ongoing basis. 5 years is the minimum. There will be demands on us that I think and potential improvements to these regimes that will happen more frequently than 5 years. And if they make sense, there's no reason why as governments, federally and provincially, we can't move forward with them. So I view the 5 years as a minimum. Thank you.
Over here.
My name is Mary Lulovisky. I'm from Ottawa, a retired federal public servant. And since October, I've been working trying to get bed bugs and cockroaches out of Ottawa community housing. So I was dealing with them, and every time I wanted anything like, how much did you spend on extermination for the last 2 years, and what are you spending, I was sent to access to information. So if this stuff was on their website, it would have saved me months of work. And I did end up, it took me 3 months to find that out. So I guess my question is, I really, having spent 3 months on poverty issues here in Ottawa, I really think they're not that well represented by an organization or whatever. And I think they're marginalized. I think we've made them marginalized. And if I was living with bed bugs and cockroaches to the tune of 20 or 30 in my apartment or whatever, I'd feel pretty marginalized too. And I'd be pretty, I don't know what, against government. Like, are they doing anything for me? I don't live in Ottawa community housing, but I've experienced it in the last 4 months, and I didn't like what I found.
Thank you, Mary Lou, and you've provided us with, I think, a really compelling example of a very practical, and this isn't an esoteric issue when you're talking about, bed bugs in housing. I mean, what is more fundamental in terms of quality of life than having decent housing and information on that? And again, it goes back to the previous question about does it change behaviors in terms of if there's more information out there, if, for instance, frequency of an outbreak of bed bugs, if you will, it will change behaviors within government. It is only both public servants, but also the politicians. The last thing they want is issues around this. They will, if the information is made public in real time, it does have an impact on citizens and their decision making in terms of their lives. But it also puts a lot more pressure on political leaders and public servants to address these issues. But thank you very much for that example.
We have time for 2 or 3 more questions, and I'll turn the mic over here.
But of course, we're going to be engaging thousands and thousands of Canadians as part of this consultation. This is just the beginning here at Canada 2020.
Hi, I'm James McKinney. I'm one of several civil society organizers putting together a network to engage with Canada around the Open Government Partnership Action Plan, which we just launched this week at opengovdialogue.ca. In the last consultation, Canada followed a fairly traditional model of consultation where you ask the public questions, you get feedback, and then you eventually do something with it, and you addressed in an earlier comment that you'd like to get better at reporting how the feedback was used. My question is, will Treasury Board explore new models for consultation, in particular a partnership model with civil society, which has been successfully implemented now for 2 action plans in the UK?
So will we engage and use new models? Yes. I want to learn more about the UK model on that. There's examples internationally. There's been some interesting public policy in the UK successful. I mentioned Ontario earlier. I mean, we can learn from some of our provincial government examples as well. But in terms of best practices and good ideas that have been successful in other jurisdictions, other national governments or subnational governments within Canada, the answer is yes. We're very open to that and looking forward to working with you as part of this process. Thanks very much.
Over here.
Hi, my name is Jericho. I'm with Moss Discovery District. My question is around innovation. The concept of open data and open information can often feels like a little bit of a scary thing, especially if civil servants are trying to embrace innovation because of the inherent risk, the inherent possibility of failure, etc. It's often quite difficult to communicate why we need to innovate. So just want to hear if you've got any comments or ideas about balancing the open information, open data piece alongside with pushing on innovation.
I just want to understand the question, the innovation. Are you speaking about government's capacity to innovate in terms of IT and issues around that sometimes, and how that can be risky and fraught with challenges sometimes, and that's part of this? Is that part of what you're...
Yeah, I think I'm talking about much more broadly, not just in terms of government's own operations, but also pushing on the innovation agenda of this country. So pushing on things like genetics research, pushing on things like bioengineering, etc., all of that. And alongside with that, all the risk that comes along with it, how might you help civil servants think about balancing the two?
Thank you very much. And I saw Tom Jenkins here earlier, who's done a lot of work on this. And one of the things we've got to do, we talk about open dialogue with Canadians. At Treasury Board, I'd like to see open dialogue within the Government of Canada, right? I mean, the idea that we have so many silos within the Government of Canada where people are not just not talking to each other. And I'll give you an example. When you're talking about innovation and it driving how government can play a role. First of all, in terms of procurement, government procurement can be absolutely key to an innovation agenda. I mean, innovative companies need capital, they need talent, they also need customers. There are other countries that get that better than Canada. That's one thing. Secondly, the cross-pollination of activities across government. I was with Minister Baines the other day, or a few weeks ago at Dalhousie, announcing a Canada Science Chair at Dalhousie for a scientist who was putting fiberglass and other composites in concrete to strengthen and render more durable concrete used in infrastructure. So I thought about that after. I said, well, as a government, we're moving forward with a big infrastructure agenda. So why aren't we connecting that science lab at Dalhousie University to our infrastructure people and helping validate that technology commercially within our infrastructure agenda? Then I thought about it further. The scientist was from Iran. So, what does that inform us about our immigration policy and about attracting and retaining the best minds? This cross-pollination, and I'm going to make up a new word here for you, de-siloization of government that needs to happen, is something that is really important. And one of the things I get approached sometimes by, when I talk about attracting millennials to the public service, sometimes journalists say to me things like, well, how are you going to compete with Shopify or Google and, the foosball in the office and all this sort of thing? I don't think millennials care that much about foosball. They just want to be in a rational organization that makes decisions in modern ways where things aren't compartmentalized, where if they have an idea, they can share it with the CEO or anyone else within the organization. They just want to be part of an organization that makes sense. And as President of the Treasury Board, I want us to run as a Government of Canada. I want our organization to make sense in terms of how we tackle these kinds of challenges. You see that? And Deb Matthews didn't even have to get that started. Thank you very much. I want to thanks. Sorry.
Kevin Tour. I'm with the Canadian Open Data Exchange. Our mandate is seeing the value in open data and getting that value unlocked in the private sector via the private sector. So commercialization of open data, if you will. I think if there's a conversation around open dialogue, then the dialogue we're looking to open up is between government and the private sector. Minister Brison, I was wondering what your comments or your thoughts are and how do you get that dialogue going and rolling in order to make it sort of operate at maximum efficiency?
It's essential. I mean, I mentioned earlier an example of a government investing in a science and that could, has commercializable potential in our infrastructure plan. This is all part of when we talk about open dialogue in the context of broader citizens. Businesses are part of that and are key to that. Innovators within the private sector can help us solve a lot of the challenges we face in government. But I think it's absolutely key to an innovative, or rather an innovation and a prosperity agenda that this happens in. And so I think I can't add to that except that it makes such absolute sense. I mean, government's consultation with businesses has in the past been politicians speaking to a chamber of commerce and taking a few Q's and A's. Well, that's not really tenable in today's environment when at every level, government, it's not just politicians, public service and business, we need to cross-pollinating ideas. One of the, on an ongoing basis, and I think one of the results of this would be a better commercialization environment. The other thing too, I really want us to, as we move forward, is make it easier for people to move into government for periods of their careers and back out to whether it's the private sector or science or academics. We as a government, Paul Martin's government, I was part of that and proud to be part of that government. And we took some steps post-Gomery Commission that made that more difficult. The next government doubled down so I think we took some steps that were well-intentioned but were in the wrong direction. And the next government doubled down in the wrong direction. And I think we have to encourage, first of all, we have to encourage the best and brightest minds to come into government and to be able to go back out after, and that's critical. And secondly, we have to create an environment within government that rewards intelligent risk-taking. We can't basically expect great success and innovation if we create a cover-your-ass culture or mentality within government. So I think we can take some really important steps that can make that better. I know I answered part of your question, then went on to a new tangent, but I rarely find a tangent too short to follow. Thanks.
Minister, on behalf of the organizers and the participants, both in the room and online, I want to thank you today for laying out your vision of an open government and an open dialogue process. And I think that I speak for all of us when I say that we're excited to be not just witnesses to it, but participants in it. And I think you rightly noted that the conversation doesn't end, well, the conversation literally ends now between you and me and this audience. It doesn't end in terms of these issues and in terms of the government's engagement. So thank you, and we look forward to participating.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Great to see you, too.
Pleasure.